in Cairo, protesters outside the United States Embassy. It's, as you can see, it's a very, very tense situation. The violence in Libya and in Egypt, and the president's response quickly becoming a big campaign issue in the race for the White House. With us now, the former New York City mayor and one-time Republican presidential candidate Rudy Giuliani, who's supporting Mitt Romney. Mr. Mayor, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you for having me, Wolf.
Let's talk a little bit about the political fallout from this awful situation in Egypt and in Libya. First of all, listen to what Mitt Romney said today.
A terrible course for America to stand in apology for our values. That instead, when our grounds are being attacked and being breached, that the first response of the United States must be outrage at the breach of the sovereignty of our nation. An apology for America's values is never the right course.
Governor Romney.
President Obama later responded to that in an interview with CBS News. Listen to what he said.
There's a broader lesson to be learned here, and Governor Romney seems to have a tendency to shoot first, name later. And as president, one of the things I've learned is you can't do that. It's important for you to make sure that the statements that you make are backed up by the facts and that you've thought through the ramifications before you make them.
Do you think it was irresponsible?
I'll let the American people judge that.
As you know, Mr. Mayor, there are plenty of Republicans who say, maybe Mitt Romney should have held back while this crisis was unfolding before going on the attack against the president. What do you say?
I think the point that he made is almost a self-evident one. I mean, after all, I think it was the Obama administration that pulled the statement back. So it's pretty clear that the statement was a highly irresponsible statement. To try to create a moral equivalent between some independent film that the government had nothing to do with, that is insulting and probably shouldn't have been done, to try to create a moral equivalent between that and violent protest and burning buildings and then ultimately, killing people, you just don't do that. So I think
in fairness, Mr. Mayor, that statement by the U.S. Embassy in Cairo was issued before there was the kind of violence that you're talking about. I'll read that statement, just put it up on the screen. The Embassy of the United States in Cairo condemns the continuing efforts by misguided individuals to hurt the religious feelings of Muslims, as we condemn efforts to offend believers of all religions. What they say at the U.S. Embassy there was they were simply trying to diffuse what clearly was emerging as a potentially volatile situation.
I think at the time that it was issued, though, there was violent protests going on. And the question is, do you stem violent protest by making a condescending kind of statement, a kind of an appeasing statement that shouldn't have been made at all? Our government doesn't have to apologize for this. We didn't do it. Or do you take a much stronger position? So I think the proof is in the pudding. The State Department.
We did do a timeline. We went back. That statement originally was released by the U.S. Embassy before the violence in Cairo, certainly before the violence in Benghazi was known, although they retweeted it later. The State Department quickly disavowed it. The U.S. ambassador to Egypt, Ann Patterson, was here in Washington. She had nothing to do with it. Yet Romney went out and not only issued that tough statement last night, but this morning at the news conference, he doubled down on it. And people are saying maybe he should have held back.
I don't see why he should have held back. I think that the statement was irresponsible. It was a terrible mistake. The State Department withdrew it, which kind of makes clear that it was a terrible mistake. And Mitt Romney didn't say anything suggesting that the president shouldn't take action or should take action or kind of interfere in the decision-making that the president makes here. And the real end result of this is going to be what kind of action, not what kind of words, but what kind of action does the President of the United States take here to the, to what is, I don't want to escalate this, but this, you know this and I know this, this was an act of war.
Was this an al-Qaeda operation?
That's what it looks like, but I mean, you come into an American embassy, American soil, American sovereign territory, and you slaughter our ambassador. That's an act of war against the United States of America. I would have liked from the president this morning a little more outrage, a little more anger. I think sometimes the president, in trying to lead from behind, doesn't really get ahead of events. And then the events kind of take control of him. You can say
he did vow that justice will be served. He said that a couple of times. And when I hear him say that, I think of what's going on in his administration, drone-targeted killings of terrorists in Pakistan or in Yemen or in Afghanistan. It sounded to me like he was saying, you know what, if the Libyans can't find these guys who killed the American ambassador and 3 others, the U.S. will.
But he didn't say that, Wolf. I'd have been very
said justice will be served.
Okay, with the help of the Libyan government.
He did say,
and with the help of here's what I think.
The implication I heard was that the U.S. will find these guys, arrest them, or kill them if necessary.
I didn't hear that. I would have much preferred a more Ronald Reagan-like statement. Of course, I work for him, so I have a real preference for him, which would have been, this is an outrage. You don't get to kill our ambassador. We will search down and find these people and bring them to justice with or without the help of the Libyan government. I would have preferred that. I think the president has trouble with unilateral action by the United States. You could see it all during the Libya thing to start with, where he led from behind. We have been so confused by the Arab Spring. We've been on every side. First indication when Mubarak was in trouble was we were going to help Mubarak to stay in power. Then we turned on Mubarak, helped throw him out. First indication when Gaddafi was in trouble. We were going to help him stay in power. Then we sort of led from behind and took a long time, but got rid of him. And even in Syria, the first statements from our Secretary of State were that Assad was a reformer. A reformer. So all of these statements give a picture of a very confused notion about the Middle East, almost as if they don't really have their ear to the ground. And now it turns out that, we did all this and we have even stronger anti-American sentiments in the Middle East. I mean, what I just saw on your television reminded me of Iran, back several decades ago.
I hope that's not the case.
I hope that's not the case, too.
We got to leave it, Mr. Mayor, but I will say this. In defense of the president, he has launched more drone airstrikes to kill militants and terrorists in his first 3.5, almost 4 years than took place during the Bush administration. So when you say he's reluctant to take unilateral action, that is pretty decisive unilateral action.
That's a plus for the president. Iran moving inexorably to becoming a nuclear power, and the president basically dawdling with these sanctions and not having any impact on them or Russia or China to help us is the one that worries me really the most.
We'll continue the conversation on that down the road. Mr. Mayor, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you, Wolf.
Up next, Bob Woodward on the bloodshed in Libya and his controversial new book about President Obama.